Well, hello, everyone. Let me say this. So, Dr. Mina Blasey and I, my twin, Mina, we were sitting here this morning having a conversation around the crossroads of real estate and education, or do they really even intersect? Is there a crossroad? So, we are actually talking to real estate agents, the consumer, educators, principals, superintendents, and maybe even city officials, just everyone. So this is what we thought we'd do is ask all of you to have a conversation with us as we talk it through. Maybe you're going to comment in the feed, maybe you're going to send an email or a direct message. Like have a conversation with us around the crossroads of real estate. So, do you think real estate and education cross or have a crossover? Like, do they intersect? What did you take into consideration when you purchased a home, or do you even own a home? Did the schools matter to you when you purchased or moved or where you're renting? And I don't even mean school scores, but I mean all of the options at a school, maybe what I don't even know how to say this. Like, and Mina, you can come back in and tell me like what's offered at the school. Then, when someone owns a home, do they stay more engaged in the community? Do they get involved with the school district? Do they volunteer? Do they show up to the community events? Do they, do they know their neighbors when they own? When you own, is your ask much stronger with city officials? So, what do I mean? When you own a home, is it that now that I own, I'm paying taxes to the city or the county or the state? Do I have a stronger voice when I go to a city meeting because I'm an owner in a community as opposed to a renter? Now, there's so many more questions we could ask. And then I'm going to say to all of you and even Mina, like, what are we not asking? So, Mina, like, hop in, talk to me. Let's, you and I have all of these outlines of what we're working on, and if we were to just, look at that, we could talk about why we purchased, but then we were having the conversation, does anybody even care about our home ownership journey?
I don't know that they do. And the reason why I say that is because I had a conversation okay, this was actually a conversation with my mother. I also had a conversation with a friend. When I first moved to California, my mom was like, don't buy. Don't buy right away, rent, because if something breaks, the landlord can fix it for you. You don't have to worry about it, which was like, I'm weighing, do I feel like fixing stuff? And then a friend of mine said, well, I'm going to rent because I don't feel like having to figure out how to fix stuff. And sometimes that's why people sometimes rent. Well, that's just one reason. But, there were so many questions there, and you may need to jump back in. I just feel like we moved to an area based on, like, when I first moved to California, when I first got my principalship, I knew, or assistant principalship, I knew I was going to need to live closer because I was already an hour to 90 minutes away. And I started driving around. So this is kind of my story. And I picked a house where I knew my kids could walk home if the school district didn't have transportation. I knew they could get home like 3 miles, not so bad to me because of my history. And I knew that I wanted a school where they could thrive, where it was diverse, where I could check out the test scores and know that the kids were going to be safe. And sometimes we pick based on test scores, like, oh, all the kids are doing well. And I know we've had this conversation. Like in the state of California, they're rated on a scale of like level 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 and 3, you're doing well. That's where you want kids to be. So they add those two percentages together. So if like 75% are what we'll call meet or exceed or proficient in their learning, that's where families tend to want to move. But if the community doesn't look like you, it doesn't mean your group of students are doing well. So there's all these factors. And I know you and I were like, what do we like? I'm looking at the list of um of all of the different chapters, and there's a lot. And the history of education, and why should we even go to a public school? Why does it matter? And how does it benefit me? And then, can I even afford a house in that area? Like,
Now you said something important, so I'm going to go back to the rent versus buy conversation. And there are many of us that are like, I'm not going to buy, I'm going to rent because number one, it's not my problem. If something breaks, I'm calling the landlord. Here's what people don't know: when you rent, as a landlord, we are factoring in the cost for the repair. And right now, rents are much higher. Affordability is low, meaning it's hard to find a home because of affordability. You've been telling me you're driving around a new community looking to see what values are because maybe you need to buy something else, maybe. So when someone's like, even if our mom said to you, don't buy rent right away, I would say don't buy rent if I'm not sure of the community I want to be in, but I know I need to move because I need to be closer to work. Okay, makes sense. But if you rent and it's someone else's job to take care of the repairs, we're going to take care of it. You're going to call us. You're going to call us. We're going to figure out how to repair it. We might have a home warranty on the property. We probably have someone that's helping us manage our properties. We'll take care of it. And then I would take that a step further and say, I just lost my train of thought. This is the reality of just having a conversation is, oh, I got it. Years ago, and I've been licensed in real estate since 2001, in the industry since 97. When I had an agent refer a client to me in the Glendale Heights area, this agent was way up north, and she said, Carrie, I have a client. Can you help him put his home back on the market? Because the tenant is going to be moving. I'm like, great, no problem. So I went and met the homeowner. And before we even went in, I talked to the homeowner, and he told me he had never lived in the home. So he purchased this property, new construction, and then realized he couldn't stay there because job was somewhere else. So now this homeowner moves up north in Illinois, and they have to move in a tenant. This person had purchased the property and owned it for 30 years. I was like, interesting. The same tenant had lived there for 30 years. So I go in, I'm walking through, the homeowner's walking me through, and I'm like, this is what I would update. This is what I would repair.
Oh, wait, they lived in the house that they are renting for 30 years that somebody else owned. That's what I heard.
That's what you heard.
Messed me up. Okay.
So
Oh.
now, and I didn't ask the question yet, but over time I found out that the homeowner bought the property on him with a mortgage. And then this tenant that had moved in, I had to go back to show the property to potential tenants, or I had to allow someone else in, or I had to go back to make sure the updates were repaired. And this tenant who I didn't represent, and I said, I'm not your real estate agent. However, if you would like me to help you buy something or rent something else, I'm happy to help. And he said, well, we already have something, but I'm really frustrated because I paid off this guy's mortgage. And I'm thinking, I'm like,
did he say that out loud for real?
And here's the worst part of all of it is this tenant had never planned to buy and was not in a position to buy. This is where in the real estate space that I'm like, this is why we need to educate, come up with video content, or talk to tenants around why, if you're going to rent, it's fine. But when you rent, whether the landlord or, whether the landlord or not owns the property outright, you are building wealth for someone else. Now, I am all for, if you never want to own, that's fine. But as you're saying that, are you saving money somewhere? What are you doing for your future? Because if you don't have an asset, and there are people out there that will say, if you have a mortgage, it's not an asset. And I would say, I would rather you own a property and pay off the property so it is eventually an asset, and you're even building equity. So this person had never put themselves in a position to own. They paid off this other person's mortgage. This person didn't sell the property, put another tenant in there to keep helping them build wealth without even thinking about building wealth. And this is why I like to talk to. Now, here's the next question.
Okay.
In the schools, whether it's early education, elementary, middle school, high school, maybe not early education, but do we know the demographics in our school districts? Do we have a lot of renters? Do we have a lot of homeowners? You know, could that impact education and real estate? Or I would say, do we even, I have two questions. Do we even teach students how to plan for home ownership so they can stay in the communities or want to come back to the communities? Because we all, in real estate, I can think of the neighboring communities or places where we live. We have several, let me say, at least 4 or 5 rental communities where I live. And when these kids go to the school, because you've told me what
Yeah.
happens, there could be turnover rate for the school. And when you have people that don't own, the stability in the area is not the same as when you have home ownership. And when you can go look up the data, maybe that's what something we'll go do. Let me write that
Yeah,
down.
but we can't,
It,
we know, we do know. We know if they rent, we know because we know the community. So, as a principal, I'll give you my perspective from a principal's when I was principal. Most of the families, most of the families that were close enough, they didn't walk because it was just too far to walk and it was in the desert, but most of them lived in I'll say a house, like a single family house. Doesn't mean they weren't renting, but they were single family homes. And we could get students that were in apartments. I was in a school that students could come into the school site anywhere in the district. And there were families that lived in rental properties. And because of those rental properties, they would move more frequently. They moved more frequently. Did they leave my school site? Not very often because it was a parent choice school. That's a conversation. So basically, they chose to come to my school site because it was a science, technology, engineering, and mathematics school. It was infused in the classroom. Every teacher had access to that product, that curriculum to teach alongside the typical content, ELA, math, whatever. And it's quite literally how do I say this? They didn't leave. You can look up on what we call the California DataQuest dashboard. You can look up the term transient, like how often do the percentage of students that leave the school site. My school, not so much. But that's one thing. The other thing is depending on where you are, even in California, Florida, wherever there are rental properties, and I mean people who rent out their house, and it's an older community, and there's a group of people, what they do is they go and grab those houses, they tear them down, and they are now making things or building, the townhomes. They're like building townhomes, and they're selling them instead of the house being $1.5 million, the condos or whatever, like there's 3 of them, they're each worth $1.5 million on some land that used to have only one house. Now either people can't afford it or they're going to the apartment complexes, and slowly those are getting taken too. So that's a huge conversation. And I don't know what your thoughts are about it, but
let me tell you what I heard as someone that wants to build. I heard go work with the city, find out what they'll allow, and go buy a property that's on a huge lot, tear it down, and build 3 houses. That's what I heard.
Right, and that's happening. And but even so, some families with purpose, whether they have an education background or not, and I don't mean a teacher, I mean they like, oh my gosh, I want my kids to thrive. I didn't go to college. I didn't finish high school. They're seeking out with purpose. These are good schools, and they might deem it a good school district just based on no data. They have better houses there. They are closer to a waterfront. They are closer to a downtown area. They have a beautiful grocery store, so they must have a better education. And I would argue that there is research that says that if they have better grocery stores, the education's better. If
And
it,
well, here's what's crazy about that. The community that I live in, as I fix my camera, the community that I live in, I always struggle with. I believe that the grocery store could be better or renovated, rehabbed, refurbished, whatever you want to call it. Because when I go to a neighboring city, I'm like, this grocery store is my grocery store, but they have made so many more updates, and the community would have to say something. But I bet that grocery store makes just as much money, if not more money, than the neighboring city where you might deem it to be more affluent. I know my history of the city I live in, and I there are days when I struggle. Now, do we have a few grocery stores? We have two, maybe more than two grocery stores that, like the La Hacienda. I can't think of. There's another supermarket that I feel like their vegetables are better than the
where,
traditional grocery
would you
store.
say La
It's
Hacienda?
definitely better than
Where is
Aldi.
this? Like in Illinois somewhere?
Yeah, well, West Chicago. So, like, my point is, there are days when I feel like, how do we need to have a voice and we need to say something, because even Jonathan, who works in the grocery store, he's like, Mom, I had to go to a neighboring city to work in that grocery store, and he was like, it was so different. Like everything was just better. So there could be truth in if someone's saying, go look at the grocery store to see the affluency. And I feel like that, we could be doing our kids a disservice, because in my community, we have dual language, we have early education. One day I'm going to go take a video of this school that looks just like Schoolhouse Rock. When I tell you it's the cutest school, kids, early education, they learn how to play the violin starting at 3. It is like the opportunity of a lifetime. And I have heard, I don't have the data, but I have heard that people will move to our city because we have early education, because we have programs for kids with autism, because we have programs for kids with disabilities, because we actually have a welcome center in our city, where if you come to our
West
city,
Chicago, you have a welcome
yes,
center.
like we have a welcome center for people that speak another language. Probably Spanish is the second most spoken language. Well, you said, well, maybe it's more than that, because you said 82% of the kids in my city speak Spanish. So there could be some truth around what people are saying we should look at. But I would say, as a real estate agent, we can't tell you where to live. You can tell us
I can tell
where you
you.
want to live. But this is why I think there is a crossroad on why real estate agents should work with the educators, the principals, the superintendents, and even, you said, the staff, because they can tell a homeowner or a future buyer what is offered and what they believe, because I didn't know what was offered in the school district.
But there are sometimes that educators, teachers, support staff, they may say things based on their beliefs, like, "Ooh, you don't want to live over there." I'm going to only say I don't know that I always agree with that, because I did have an agent, he person, somewhat crossed the line with me and said, "Are you sure you want to live there?" And I ended up buying in a place in California, and I loved that house. It had a huge pool. It wasn't in an area that a lot of people would have looked for, but I wanted a house with land, and it had 6 bathrooms. I don't know that I was looking for 6 bathrooms. We didn't really use them all the time. But the point is that I moved where the community said, it was 3 miles. It met my criteria. I knew how to keep my own children safe. When I bought it, it was, the difference between when I bought it within a 9-year span, it went up like
A
300,000,
dollars,
just a few dollars. But the point is that I would tell people, yes, go live there if you want to. Yes, you have children there. But the way you keep children safe, and it's not the same as when, when we were kids, like you just leave your house and be back before the street lights are on, because we didn't have this beautiful, shiny thing, called the cell phone. So you couldn't just track kids. But we move where you think that you can raise your children, or you move where you know that you can feel like you can have a lifestyle that makes you happy. And that's what I'm telling you. And I'm not a real estate agent. Let me be clear. I also am going to be looking for, if I was a parent with young children, or if I was a looking to have children, I'm looking for data. I'm looking for, like, what do the statistics say? Are they improving? That is the number one thing. Like, so we call it the W effect. Like, this year they went up, this year they went down, this year they went up. If that's happening, that's not where I'm going. I would rather have a slow incline over time in education any day. And I
But
would
what
tell,
if you have someone that already lives in this community, they rent in the community, they love the community, and they have the W? What would you say to them? Get involved, talk to
yes,
the school district, and so we can get these scores to where they should be, because we don't want flight. We want
no,
you to
we want you to
stay
stay.
where you are and get involved in the community.
But let me
Especially,
tell you
even
why.
if you rent, you should get involved.
Well, let me tell you I shouldn't tell you why, but let me give you some questions that you ask. How can I help the school district benefit my child? What can you do? What can I do to tell you about my demographics? Sometimes what happens is a group of families will go in and they're very upset, but upset for the wrong reason. Upset like, you're not helping my kid. You're not helping my kid do better, or my group of students, or my demographic students. What about the girls? What about the boys? That's not it's a question, and it is something that school districts should be looking at. But you go in and say, this is how my student is doing. They're not improving. What's happening? What are you going to do to support my child, and how can I support you? Because there might be something that the school district doesn't know. Obviously, they'll know if they're a foster child or if they're homeless, but kids come to school with whatever's going on in their head. Parents bring that baggage too. You might need to come and say that, like, my kid isn't doing well because mom and dad, we got a divorce, or uncle was really mean to them, or the whatever happened
Or
before.
or they're the parent when they get home, because they're the oldest sibling, and
Yep.
the single parent has to go to work and they couldn't get their homework done.
Yeah, you have to try to seek to understand, like, really hear the family values, and don't districts, we are, not even districts, just school sites as a whole, but we insert our cultures as, like, I'm middle class. I grew up middle class. So therefore, we have mental class mentalities. We tend to take that information, and I bet real estate agents do it too. We take that in and we insert it into the person, and then we don't help them where they are. Do you know how many people would buy a doggone house probably if we help them where they are?
And you said something huge, because we just had a conversation with real estate agents because our industry had a major update, different day. And I was sharing, so the conversation was around, how do we help a buyer, because now compensation, you have to have an agreement with a buyer in order to show a home. Every state is different, whether they changed the law or went with this settlement. And now you have brokerages that are not going to ask the listing, they're not going to ask the seller in their agreements to ask the seller to pay a buyer's agent compensation. So now in this buyer agreement, the buyer's agent has to, we should have always explained it. In Illinois, we've had these documents, but now the buyer is on the hook for compensation. So now this means that we are using an addendum to ask the seller to pay the compensation. And the conversation was around, what if you have a buyer that cannot pay? So what you just said, and here's the tie-in, is you have us real estate agents that grew up in a certain arena. It could have been the C-suite, it could have been, the affluent, it could be middle class, it could be a class where maybe you were in a position where you were paid a paycheck to paycheck. I don't want to define the classes in a way where it sounds demeaning. However, you will have some people, the unintended consequences are people that cannot pay a buyer's agent. So we need to meet people where they are. And I just remember someone saying, well, Carrie, it's the net for the seller. I don't care about the seller if I'm the buyer's agent, because my number one job is to protect my buyer. So that means as a real estate agent, we need to be talking to the loan officer saying, okay, they're approved to buy. When they're approved to buy, do they have the ability to come out of pocket to pay my compensation? And then the lender says, nope, they're real tight on funds, so we need to ask the seller to pay that compensation. And now you might have a seller that's like, nope, I'm out. So my next question to the lender is does this, can my buyer in the contract ask the seller for a closing cost credit? And if that's the case, how high can I go? So when you just said, how do we meet people where they are? Meeting people where they are is asking them about their finances, asking the loan officer to talk to you about where they are, can they afford it, and always let the consumer know, your client, that it is confidential. We have a fiduciary responsibility to protect all of their information, but our goal is to get them into a home. So again, the tie-in is giving people what they need, what they want, not what you want them to have, and assume that we're writing contracts and they have the money.
But just that information alone, along with what I just said, is they're trying to buy a house in your area. And now you mean I have to come up with money? And I just want to get into that school. And how do I get into that school? Because getting into that school is all I want. So I can make it easier by just going and renting the house from the person who already has it and says they will rent the house for me. So now we've just confused them with, you mean I have to pay? That's definitely.
And so the unintended consequences are compensation always came out of the proceeds of the transaction. Now the buyer financed it or came with cash and paid for it. It's just easier for the consumer if it can be built into the loan by pulling it from the seller's proceeds. So it doesn't mean that a seller won't pay compensation. It just means our conversation has to be different. So I'm not saying that you should have to go rent. I'm saying as real estate professionals, we need to understand to talk to the consumer, where are they, and to talk to the lender so we know how to negotiate, because we want everyone to get into a home. So again, I'm not saying go rent.
No, that, and I didn't say that. What I'm thinking is you have to be a counselor, like teachers, to these people, because you need to take a step back and be like, you can do this. It may not feel good, but let me help you through the process. Because I'm telling you, when I sold my house, it wasn't my money. I was getting money and I knew I was going to get paid. They were going to pay if I had any mortgage left or whatever. And even my conversation with my agent was, I knew how much the percentage was. This was before this new whatever came out. And it was normal for you to, whatever my agent had, they split those proceeds. But my brain honestly was like, yeah, but I want the money. It's my money. But it really isn't, because you said something the other day. I was listening to your live on Friday, and you said, really, it's the person buying the house that's paying everybody.
You just don't get to take it home.
You just don't. Which is like, I was like, oh, like that's gold. When I turned my thinking into, I'm getting paid, so is everybody else. That money wasn't mine yet until the house closed, whatever language we're using. But the reason why, since you brought it up, the reason why I brought it up with the renting is, if you don't help your customer calm down and like, we can figure this out, we'll work through it, they're going to rent. And renting is still different than being in a school district, because you can leave faster. At the end of my lease, I'm out. I'm going to go and buy the new build that's down the street and around the corner in the new district. So for us, I'm telling you right now, most school districts are losing students because they have options. You mean I can go online now and just learn and not leave my house?
Yeah, because there's American School. People don't even, I'm not telling you to go sign up for American School, but there is a homeschooler type program. And I know that American School is hugely, it's valuable, because there's an actual physical American school in the Canary Islands where you can go to school, have an education, and it's a US education. And people from all over the world, where their parents have to work in the Canary Islands, part of Spain, they're graduating and they're learning other languages and they're getting an education through
So what you
the
said
United
is I
States.
need
It's
to
kind
move
of
to
cool.
the Canary Islands, but
That's why I was like, Mina, you should go there and work.
there are options, and that's the part that we need to meet people where they are. And even in education, I'm telling you, when people own their home, they're less likely to leave. And the impact on a school is most school districts in the United States get funding based on the student going to school. Now, Ohio, not so much. Not everywhere, even in the state of California, but most of the schools in the state of California, there's different types of funding depending on the amount of money that the taxes in the community brings in. It is profound when you see a decline in what we call the average daily attendance of students because you don't get the money. And, it doesn't just impact the funding. It does impact the funding, but there's a trickle effect. Teachers don't, I'm like, I'm not going there if I'm a new teacher because they can't afford to keep me and I'm the one that's going to lose my job. So a good teacher can take their time and they're going to apply to the districts that have more money and the increase in population because the students are moving there. Teachers and families are looking at that too now. The people who are researchers, I don't want to use educated because that's ambiguous, but people who are researching now are looking at the schools that are increasing in attendance because that means more money's going there. And
Interesting.
yeah, so that impacts real estate because even in where I live in Beaumont, California. The community as a whole we have land. This school district that's in Beaumont is growing rapidly. Like before COVID or even during COVID, let's just put it this way, they increased about 2,000 students since then. And by 2029, they are going to increase probably another 3,000 to 4,000 students. Like, could you imagine the impact? And impact is great, more money. Now, like, oh my gosh, I have to make more schools. But housing, my house, I'm betting it's going to increase in, whatever.
Well, not whatever. You want it to increase in value, or you at least want it to remain stable. So you said, what I heard you say is when someone owns, they're often committed to the area until their kids graduate, unless there's a really big move and they have to move. So as we kind of wrap this up today, it would be cool if we could go live every Sunday and get people
Maybe we
in.
should at least.
Yeah,
and bring some
should
people
talk.
in.
We need to plan, right? And
Yeah.
not be tired in the morning. So as we kind of wrap up, what are some questions you have for those that are watching or watching the replay so we can go and build on this and do more research so we can help everyone understand the value of real estate and education and how they cross and why homeownership is still valuable?
The first question would be, what questions do you have? Because typically, and I don't mean you, I mean the person, people listening to the replay, what questions do you have when it comes to education and buying a house? Because I know real estate agents can't answer that question, but the community can, the principal can. And then the next thing I would say is, ask yourself this question. How do I feel when I walk into the school where I want my child to go?
Okay. So I like those questions. And let me just remind all of you, we want to hear from you. We want to know what you want to know when it applies to real estate, when it applies to education. What are the do's? What are the don'ts? Tell us in the feed or shoot us an email. I am Carrie Little, the designated managing broker of Caramark Realty Group in Illinois and Florida. You can find me on YouTube at, I believe it's Carrie J. Little. Everywhere else, I am Carrie Joe Little. Send me a direct message or comment here on this live.
And I am Dr. Mina Blazey, and on YouTube, I am MJ Blazey, and everywhere else, I'm Mina J. Blazey. So thank you so much for watching. And you know what? Come back.